The last words from Duke's mouth had been clearly heard by everyone. By now, even Layla stopped complaining, and every single one of them remained motionless in the room. They received confirmation that one of them had been caught. There was always the possibility of something like this happening. However, before getting caught by the military, Quinn always thought that another student would have at least gotten them first. He prepared for such a scenario, but he wasn't ready for this one. "Fight them! Get him out of there!" A voice seemed to be resounding at the back of his mind. However, he kept his rationality in proper order. Quinn didn't have the power to fight against the military just for one person. Currently, Peter was left in the room. He was sitting down on a chair at the table. His hands were still cuffed behind his back. Nathan and 4 other soldiers were in there with him. However, Duke was no longer in the room and went somewhere else. The room was silent. Meanwhile, Nathan was preoccupied with watching some of Peter's previous films. He wanted to make sure that he hadn't misread the information he had. In fact, he was extremely sure that Peter didn't have an ability in the first place and had later been given the Earth ability. But when Nathan used his ability to drain away Peter's MC cells, he realized that the latter was using a transformation ability. As he was still in his chair, handcuffed, Peter continually looked around the room to find an opportunity for a way out. Despite a small bubble being left over around his hands, the energy he recently lost was already starting to recover. It was for this reason that a part of his body felt incredibly weak. Thankfully, it seemed like they underestimated Peter's true strength. In just a short amount of time, he would be strong enough, even with the bubble on him, to break free from the handcuffs. Peter glanced at the guard closest to his right side. Once he broke the cuffs, if he reacted quick enough, he should be able to kill him in one blow. Even if he was attacked by the others, his body would be able to withstand or heal any of their hits. Peter also had another trick up his sleeve. He could turn 2 people into lesser whites. If he was to use this now, then there was a higher chance he would be able to get out of this situation. However, despite this plan in his head, there was one more person he had to take in mind. Nathan was still here. He was unsure of exactly how strong Nathan was and what his ability did. And with Nathan being a general at the military base, Peter was sure that he was strong, but he had no choice left. This was a risk he had to take. A portion of his energy had now come back, and with a slight tug, he tested the cuffs that restrained him. "Wait!" a small voice directly echoed in his ear. "Don't do anything yet, Peter. We still don't know what will happen to you, so just remain calm." These instructions were being transmitted by the small spider Logan had placed on him before. Peter hesitated for a moment, trying to decide whether he should listen to Logan or not. However, he felt like he could trust him and canceled whatever plans he had just thought up. "Since they got me an errand out of something like this before, they can surely do it again," Peter reassured himself with these thoughts. Unaware of what was currently happening inside the room, no one had a clue what to do next. "We have to start thinking about leaving the military base." Vorden broke the silence. "With Peter or without?" Layla shot back a question. "Without, of course. There's a high chance that they will soon start interrogating him. By then, they'll link him to everything that has happened so far and find out we were all involved." "I think we're safe from anything like that happening," Quinn quickly responded. "I know Peter won't sell us out on his own accord, and even if they did get that girl to question him, it still wouldn't work." "How would you know that?" Vorden asked. "Facts will back me up on this. Peter is different now. One of the things that's different about him is that certain abilities no longer work on him," Quinn explained. Fax nodded in agreement while adding in his own words. "He's right. A white is unaffected by abilities that target the mind or body in some type of way. They are also immune to poison. They don't sleep, and they don't register a heartbeat. A white will never give up his master either. If you're worried about them linking him to us, the only connection you guys have is being his past teammates." "Even so, that still doesn't solve our original problem," Layla continued speaking. "They're going to do something to Peter and will eventually find out he's different. Don't you think that they're already wondering why he has a different ability now? If they find out about his healing capabilities, he'll be used as a lab experiment for the rest of his life." What Layla just said was one of Quinn's true fears. It was why he was extremely intent on hiding his secret in the first place. The fear that he would be locked up in a lab somewhere and be tested on. If that ever happens, then everyone would say it was just fine because it was for the sake of humanity, to help them defeat the Dalki. "There are a few possibilities," Luckily for us, this world still has an order of civilization. I still don't know how far that will get us." Logan started speaking. "Even if Peter is to be moved to a research lab or such, or maybe even treated as a terrorist who works for Pure, he will still have to undergo a trial first. I'm pretty sure that this so-called trial would only be for show. The generals in True Dream have their ways to speed up the process and put the judge in their pockets. What this does, however, is give us a little bit more time. I guess that before Peter attends the trial, an investigation will continue in public or behind the scenes. He'll probably be temporarily placed in the underground dungeons. We aren't sure how heavily guarded it is now, or if we have the capabilities to break him out, but we can use this opening to save him." "Just let this one go, Quinn." Vorden's words sounded like an ultimatum. "You already saved him once before. Forcing a rescue operation would get us all killed. I'm sorry to say this, but if you decide to go through with it, I won't be helping you." The room fell silent once more after Vorden spoke. The reason was that the others kind of agreed with what he was saying. The dungeon was a place where they kept undisciplined students and soldiers. There was a higher chance it was heavily guarded because of this. "Whatever you do, Quinn, I'll be there with you," Feck said as he slapped him on the back. Looking around the room, Quinn could see the expressions on their faces. For some reason, no one else volunteered to help. Even Layla, who wanted to participate in the operation, didn't do so for the simple reason that she felt she was too weak. She knew that by forcing herself to do it, she would only hinder them. "It's okay," Quinn responded. "I've decided. It's best not to save Peter right now. It's too risky and is none of your responsibilities." While saying these words, something in Quinn's mind tugged at him, telling him to try and save Peter. Despite deciding not to go through with the plan, it still kept reminding him, "Is there a connection here from before? It seems like I can fight it a bit now." Even though Quinn had now grown stronger, it seemed like he wasn't going to let his emotions get the better of him. It might have also been the fact that Peter wasn't in immediate danger right now. He knew that the military would not kill him, but instead would perhaps torture him. He had convinced himself that Peter wasn't going to die any time soon, and this was how he stopped himself from trying to save Peter. "That's the right choice," Vorden agreed with him. Was it really, though? Quinn's mind asked this question. For some reason, he had this huge feeling of guilt looming over his head. If he knew he made the right choice, he shouldn't be feeling this way. But right now, he felt nothing but miserable. Just then, another sound emerged from the computer. It was a low and familiar tone. Duke was talking.
"It looks like True Dream decided on what to do with you."
Although the two generals didn't get along, they knew they were both working for the same side. Duke wasn't oblivious to Nathan's real strength and how he had gotten to his position in the army. If it was just restraining a single student, he could trust him. The reason for leaving the room was to contact True Dream himself. Below the special VIP room, there was the Duke's office. After popping inside, he immediately opened up his communicator and started a video call. An electronic display hovered in the air, and the lines at the bottom showed that a connection was trying to be made. "What is it, General Duke?" Jack True Dream said. "I told you only to call me if you found those two kids." In the video call, Jack was sitting in his chair, and in the backdrop, the whole city that was directly under his control could be seen, showing through the glass windows in his skyrise building.
"Now, you know me better than that,"
Duke replied with a smile. Suddenly, something grabbed Jack's attention. Ever since leaving the military base, he had forgotten what had happened at the school, how the Pures group had made him look like an idiot. Not only that, but he remembered the fear he had in that room. For some reason, the sleeping ability of one of his trusted guards didn't work. It had put him in an unfavorable position, and there was a chance he could have died that day. Before, Jack wasn't too bothered by Pure and the politics between the military and them. Now, he had a significant interest in getting rid of them.
"We have found the boy known as Peter. He was one of the students that Pure said they had safely in their hands. It turns out he never left the academy and was using a disguise ability," Duke explained.
"Excellent. And what about the girl?" Jack asked.
"We have reason to believe Pure might have genuinely taken her. My theory is that the student known as Peter was initially working for Pure all along. They must have hidden that he had the disguise ability, waiting for the perfect opportunity to use it. It would then make sense why the sleeping agent didn't work on him if they managed to prepare something beforehand. I have to add, though, this is all just speculation. We are unable to confirm anything. For some reason, it seems our truth seeker is unable to use her ability on him. Perhaps Pure is advancing quicker than we think and have been able to find something to stop abilities.
The military knew Pure's goal, so they gathered that they must be working on some serum or vaccination that would target the MC cells. So far, there had been no sign of a result. Duke's line of thought was that if they couldn't take away or get rid of their abilities, maybe they could create or alter a person who was able to block them.
"Have you reported this to Paul yet?" Jack asked. "No, I did as you asked and spoke to you first."
"Good. If Paul were to find out about this, he would want the student to go through the court process. If that happens, he might eventually shift them to the research department, and from there, he will be out of my hands," Jack said. "I believe the punishment that will be given to the student will be too light. I have an idea that will not only be a fair punishment for Peter, but will perhaps allow us to punish those Pure members." Jack went on about the details of the plan and recounted the outline to Duke. Both of them needed to be on the same page. After all, technically, Duke worked for the head General Paul. Doing this would mean he was not doing his duty as a soldier and had decided to help out an outsider like True Dream, who technically didn't work for the military but only closely cooperated with them.
"Excellent," Jack said with a cheer in his voice. "Then we shall meet at the intermilitary tournament."
The tough decision was for Quinn and the others to leave Peter behind, and 2 members of the group were struggling with this significantly. In Logan's room, they continued to track Peter's movements, and it was as they expected. Someone had taken Peter to the underground dungeon, or at least that's what they suspected, as the spider's signal was lost, and the area last seen was the dungeon entrance. The next day had arrived, and there seemed to be 2 members of the group struggling with Peter's disappearance the most, one of them being Quinn. He still felt a little responsible for what was happening to Peter. Although the system had reassured him that Peter was fine, due to the current distance between the 2 of them, if Peter was hurt or in trouble, Quinn would be able to feel it if Peter was being tortured or hurt. However, Logan's was a different case. He was in his room, working on one of his gadgets on his workbench. He had been working through the whole night, and usually he worked late, but this was later than usual, and he didn't even take a break. It was as if he was trying to get his mind off of something. Finally, after hours of working on some gadgets, he decided to take a break. Lifting his robotic molecule, he leaned back in his chair. "Oh, that was hard, Peter. Would you pass me a sandwich?" Logan asked with his hand held out, but he felt nothing in his hand after waiting a while. He turned around in his chair and looked at the spot where Peter would usually stand. He hardly ever moved from there, other than to bring him tools and play the VR game once in a while. "There has to be information on that dungeon," Logan said as he hopped onto his computer and started to type away. Back in school, lessons had resumed as usual. Quinn didn't know why, but he seemed to be avoiding the others and was starting to hang around with Fex more often. Even in his room, the conversation with Vorden felt a little awkward. Vorden had helped him out wherever possible, and it was the first time he had decided not to. It wasn't his fault, but Quinn didn't know how to deal with it. Besides, he had problems he was trying to solve. The voice in the back of his head was starting to get louder as more time passed. The voice kept telling him to go against the school and fight them. Try to get Peter out of there. He continued to ignore this and went by his days as usual. However, Fex noticed this strange behavior. He would often, at times, suddenly stop while walking, grabbing his head. By now, Fex had already figured that Quinn was the one who turned Peter and assumed that the pains must be from whatever the school was doing to Peter in the dungeon. For some reason, Fex didn't quite believe that, though. The evening had come, and the lessons were over. Some students were still outside the school during this time, while others decided to relax in their dorm rooms. Quinn had stated that he was going to play the game for a bit of practice. Hearing this, Fex agreed to come with him. "Hey, I'll come with you. I haven't played myself in a while." "Oh, darn," Quinn replied. "I just remembered I promised Vorden I would do something with him tonight. Maybe next time." "That's okay," Fex said as he watched Quinn walk off. He knew something was up. It was clear Quinn had said that to get rid of him. These strange actions led Fex to act. Whatever Quinn was doing, it was clear he didn't want others to see it. Once the 2 of them were a great distance away, Fex decided to follow him. The distance between them was quite large, and the reason for this was because of the smell. Another vampire was able to smell another. They had a strong sense of smell and could tell the difference between them too. Still, their eyesight was far better than their sense of smell, so although Fex stayed a distance away, he could still see Quinn. While following Quinn, it had led him down a hallway where he could see him talking to a student he had never seen before. I didn't know he had other friends besides those weirdos, Fex thought. Quickly, the two of them left the corridors and started to head outside. Finding this all too strange, Fex continued to follow the two of them. Eventually, they left the school grounds and entered the woods by the park nearby. Fex quickly realized what was going on by the strange movements the student was taking. He was under the influence of Quinn. Finally, when they reached a secluded spot, Quinn looked around to see if there was anyone he could spot. However, Fex was well trained in the arts of spying and following someone. The experience and training he had were levels above Quinn's, even if Quinn was technically stronger right now. Raising his claw-like hand, Quinn slit a part of the student's forearm and started drinking away. What is he doing? He has Layla, and he can ask for blood any time he wants, right? So why go through all this trouble to get a stranger's blood? Fex thought. Quinn thought, as he looked at the student opposite him. The sounds in his head that kept telling him to fight back were getting louder throughout the whole day. It took him a whole day to figure out what the voice was after realizing it was his consciousness. It was his true feelings about what he wanted to do. Quinn didn't just want to let Peter rot down in the cellar on his own. He wanted to fight and get him back. He didn't know how much of his decisions were being influenced by his strange vampire powers. It might have been the connection between the two of them, or whether or not it was his own decision. In the end, he felt like it was a bit of both. He hadn't given up on Peter like he had told the others. He was planning to get him back. To be able to fight back, there was something important that Quinn needed to do, which was to get stronger. Luckily for Quinn, there was a quick way to do that. It was consuming as many different types of human blood as possible. It took a while for Quinn to find somebody, as he had to make sure that they met certain conditions. Since it's night, the student would have to be on their own. It was because nobody could see him talking to the student outside of the campus. There was less chance of someone spotting him. The second condition was that Quinn's influence skill needed to work on them. There were a few high levels, and even some low levels that had a strong-willed mind. Thankfully, Quinn's charm points had increased, giving him even more options than before. However, it was still incredibly hard to find students due to the conditions mentioned above that needed to be met. Using his inspection skill, Quinn knew what stat he would get beforehand. However, he could not pick and choose as freely as he wanted to, due to the small section of students viable. He had selected his first target carefully. After making a small cut on the forearm and taking in the blood, the system granted him a familiar message. O positive blood type consumed, 1 free stat point earned. Quinn decided to put the stat point into his charm without a second thought, raising the total to 23 points. The reason for doing this was because the stronger his charm skill became, the more people he could use his influence skill on. What Quinn realized after the fight with the King-tier beast was that, even with his strength stat being high, that power meant nothing if he didn't have the equipment to back it up. It was nearly impossible for him to put a scratch on the beast with only his intermediate gauntlets. He couldn't keep relying on the blood hammer strike. It took too long to use. And what would he do if the attack didn't work one day? For now, with no way of getting any new equipment, this was the only thing he could do to get stronger. After fully consuming the student's blood, he commanded the student to head back to his dorm room and forget about everything once he returned. Fex had already left the scene by now, since everything had answered his curiosity. However, it only made him wonder why he needed to do this. For now, he would put a pin on it and keep it in his mind. Come on, Fex, what are you worried about? Is it really strange for a vampire to be sucking the blood of a human? Maybe he and his little girlfriend just got into an argument, Fex thought while heading back. While Quinn was busy outside, it left Vorden in his dorm room on his own. He wasn't his usual calm and chilled-out self, and instead was continually pacing himself up and down the place in one area. If Syl finds out that I went against Quinn, do you think he'll try to take over? Vorden asked. Hey, can you just stop mentioning it? Look, it's not like you two broke up or something, Rayton whispered angrily, making sure Syl wouldn't be able to hear. Besides, if you hadn't said it, I would have tried to take over you myself and stopped you. No suicide missions.
Anyway, about the tournament, are you going to let me fight or what? Your weak ass would just make us look weak."
"You know my answer. Why even bother asking?" Vorden replied. "We have to lose on purpose. Many people will be watching this fight, and if we display anything out of the ordinary, then a lot of attention will be on us. It might even cause the family to get involved." Rayton laughed nervously after hearing the words family. It sent a shiver down his spine, and his heart felt like it had sunken in place. "Good point." The next few days leading up to the inter-tournament, everyone was off doing their own thing. Layla continued to keep an eye on Sia, and it seemed like she had held to her word, not reporting the incident to any of the teachers or higher-ups. Rather, Sia was talking to Layla more than before. Layla welcomed this. There was an empty feeling in her mind and body after Aaron left, and although it still didn't feel quite the same, Sia seemed to be filling up the place a little. Vorden was often called off by Dell to practice fighting against certain students for the upcoming tournament with the other students, and Logan continued to try to find any information about the dungeon, all resulting in a failure. This left Quinn and Fex to their own devices, but Quinn continued to be distant with Fex, and Fex decided to go along. He continued to follow Quinn at night, and it was the same as before, only slightly different. Each night, a completely different student would be selected. It was never the same student. It was now the third night in a row that Quinn had led a student into the forest to consume their blood. This is strange, even for someone infatuated by the taste of blood. Although Fex knew some vampires were obsessed with blood, how they acted and how Quinn acted were quite different. Quinn would take a minimal amount while consuming blood. This would make sense if he were trying to test out the taste of the blood, but if they found one they would like, they would often store it in a flask-like container. Not only that, but they were picky. If it were blood they didn't like, they would spit it out in disgust. The other thing was that Quinn was quite a young vampire. Usually their sense of taste for blood was quite basic. It was only the older vampires who, after hundreds of years of tasting different blood types, started getting obsessed. So everything he was doing didn't make any sense. "Speaking of which, I wonder where my other flask is. Maybe I left it on that planet," Fex thought. When Quinn had finished consuming the female student's blood, he once again had gained an extra stat point, this time in stamina. Yesterday his result yielded another O-type blood, and he placed it into the charm again. 24 charm points, 19 stamina points. "Return to your dorm room and go to sleep. You will forget about everything that happened here tonight," Quinn said to the girl. The girl walked out of the woods and back towards the school. Quinn would often wait a while for the girl to return first before moving from his spot, just in case anyone spotted him. He could always say he just went for a walk through the woods. People would look at him weirdly, but there was nothing to be suspicious about. After some time had passed, just as he was about to leave, he heard the sound of something landing behind him, and the leaves on the floor crunching from the impact. "Fex?" he said as he turned his head. "How long has he been here? Did he see me with the student before? Well, it's not too strange, right?" "Hey, don't look so worried, man. Whatever you do in the woods with a girl is your secret," Fex said with a wink. Fex's humorous nature always seemed to calm Quinn a bit, even if he did sometimes say it at the wrong time. "What are you doing here?" Quinn asked. "I was worried about you," Fex replied. "Look, whatever you've been doing these past few days is up to you. You're not exactly doing anything wrong, and you've been careful. Other than me, I don't think anyone else has found out about this. Please think of me as your second pair of eyes." "The reason I decided to involve myself, though, is that I am a little worried about you." "Worried about what?" "I still don't know who your master is. Don't worry, I'm not going to pry about it or anything. I think you would have told me by now if you could, but the problem is, it seems like he hasn't been teaching you properly. I'm serious now, Quinn. You have to be careful. If you keep consuming blood every day like you have been doing, you're going to become addicted." He couldn't help but utter, "What did you say?" "I guess you didn't know, huh?" Fex replied, scratching his head, knowing that this was going to be a tough one to explain. "Think about it. Sometimes when we drink blood, there's this rush that comes over our bodies. There have been studies where it was observed that it increases a vampire's strength by about 10%. That's why I always carry a flask around, not just for healing. The problem is, blood is like a double-edged sword for us. The more often we consume it, the more we crave it. From an early age, vampires who had close ties to the head of families were taught to resist blood. At first, maybe we can't go on for more than 2 days without blood, but eventually, we can build up a resistance to it. The vampires who have been alive for hundreds of years have gone through this process strictly, and now some of them don't even require blood anymore. However, there are occasions where, when they go into battle, they will consume some, and make a note that not all vampires choose to go down this path. If one does drink blood after resisting it for a long time, it will only cause a small setback before they are back to normal again. Still, the same can also happen the opposite way if you keep drinking blood like this for pleasure. Eventually, you will become an addict, craving blood, and not even be able to quench your thirst. To put it in simple terms for you to understand, you would become a conscious bloodsucker. The explanation had Quinn slightly worried. He had been drinking blood quite regularly to increase his strength. If there was an opportunity to consume blood, he would take it because it allowed him to grow stronger. When Quinn first got his vampire powers, he decided to only consume Layla's blood when needed, even though he enjoyed the taste. He was afraid of this very thing from happening. However, once he had obtained the system AI, his original fears started to lessen. Whenever he had a question about vampire matters or when something might do him harm, the system would step in to stop and explain things to him. Undoubtedly, the system AI knew what would happen to Quinn if he was to continue. So then, why didn't it try to stop him? The only thing he could do was ask. "Did you know about this? Is what he's saying true?" Quinn asked. The system had a long pause, and Fex wasn't saying much either. Fex thought that Quinn might have been consuming even more blood whenever they weren't together, such as during training sessions and in the classroom. Perhaps he was having a hard time taking in this possibility. Enjoying the taste of blood was fine, but no one wanted to be a living, conscious bloodsucker. While thinking about this, Fex started to touch his beautiful gel-backed black hair on the top of his head. "I never want to transform again. Maybe one day my hair will completely disappear and not grow back if I do that again," Fex thought. The system had taken such a long time to reply that Quinn had thought it had gone silent and chosen not to answer him. "What Fex says is true, and I'm afraid even with the system, you will be affected by this." "What?" Quinn shouted in his head, but was also cautious about making sure Fex was unable to hear him. Although he was able to keep his thoughts in his head, his body slightly jolted with anger, which didn't go unnoticed. "Why didn't you say anything when I finally thought I could trust you? You pull some crap like this." "First of all, the word you used, trust. I find it strange. In the first place, I am nothing but a system that chose to help you. Not once have I ever told you a lie. I may have hidden some things from you, but without me, you would be more or less in the same situation anyway," the system replied, now with an alteration in his voice, showing that he was annoyed at Quinn's words. Hearing the system speak like this made it feel even more human, or at least not a robot. "To be honest, without me, you would be far worse than you are right now. I never told you or suggested that you go out and consume the blood of your classmates. That was all on you. You wished to grow stronger, and I chose not to get in the way." The system was right. He had never told Quinn to do this. Due to his desire to get stronger, he resorted to this without bothering to determine if there were any consequences. He had been relying on the system too much when he should have stuck to his research. "Hey, don't worry about it too much. It's not too late, and that's why I chose to warn you," Fex said, trying to break the weird atmosphere. "All you need to do is stop drinking blood until you feel that thirst again. Then stretch that limit until you can't give in. Do this repeatedly, and each time you should be able to resist a little longer. Simple, right?" Fex did make it sound simple, and although the process of restoring blood was simple for any vampire, hardly any were able to last longer than a week without feeding, while Fex could last 2 weeks at such a young age. Most vampires weren't able to extend their times between feedings because of the excruciating pain and willpower needed for it. To put it from a human perspective, it would be similar to starving someone who was as addictive as a drug. It would be hard for him to concentrate. As the time between recovers grew longer, so did the pain. There was a point when certain top-tier vampires would pass, where the pain no longer bothered them, which was why they no longer needed blood. If Quinn was to do this, though, he thought perhaps he would have an advantage. The system would inform him when he was hungry enough, and allow him to be careful not just to pass the point where he would turn into a bloodsucker. Things that others had to perfectly time and feel Quinn would be able to cheat it. "Don't drink blood for a couple days and see what happens. That way, you'll know how far you have gone. I can help if you like," Fex offered. But Quinn was perplexed about what to do. He didn't have a couple days. Soon the interbase event would start, and they would be away from the base for a week. Could Peter last that long? If he was to do as Fex asked and wait a couple of days, then this would mean he wouldn't continue to grow. "I'll think about it," Quinn said as he walked off, not wanting to think about the situation any more. It was giving him a huge headache. "That wasn't the answer I wanted to hear," Fex whispered, looking at his back. If he answered like this, then most likely it meant Quinn had decided to continue on the path he had chosen. The next day had arrived, and everything went on as usual. There were now only 2 more days until the inter-tournament. More so than before, Quinn wanted to get his charm stats even higher and later test it on a soldier. If he could get to the point where his influence skill could work on an adult, then maybe he would be able to infiltrate the dungeon unseen and free Peter from captivity. Where to or what to do next, he hadn't quite figured out this part yet. As usual, he did his routine, only this time he was pickier about who to select as his target, carefully searching for an O blood type so he could increase his charm. Eventually, after a long time of searching the school grounds, he found one who met his conditions. The 2 of them headed into the woods and were in the usual spot. Fex had also decided to follow him once more. "Quinn, did you not listen to my warning? If you get addicted and need blood more often, I can only help you this much if you reveal yourself to the outside world. When they come, even I will have to go into hiding," Fex thought, looking at the scene. Just as Quinn was about to cut the student to absorb some blood, a message appeared. "Your hunger starts to grow. You must consume blood within 24 hours. Every hour, 1 HP will be lost until blood is consumed." It had only been a little over the 24-hour mark, and he received a message. Something that would have usually taken 2 days in the past. But after seeing the message, he hesitated to consume it. It had only been a little over 24 hours, and his HP would now start to decrease if he didn't drink any more blood. "Is this what Fex was talking about? Have I already started to become an addict?" Quinn thought. He started to wonder if he continued to go down this path, how soon would he need blood? Will it get to the point where blood needs to be consumed every hour? In a way, he was lucky that he had caught it now. It was only because of Fex's message that he had decided to be even pickier with his victims. He was trying to select an O blood group person who also met the condition of being a student and alone. This caused him to select someone a little later than usual. If he had taken the blood at his regular time, he would have never received the message and would have continued onward until the tournament. He started to stare at the blood seeping from the cut on the student's arm, trying to think if there was any way for him to get around this problem. Storing blood was a challenging task, even if he wanted to keep it for later. It was why he was so thankful for the blood bank. Unfortunately, the blood bank worked in a way that meant he would have to consume too much blood. Only when his HP was full would blood from the victim go into his blood bank, which meant he would have to consume the blood in the first place, which wouldn't help him at all. "Go back to your dorm room and forget about everything that happened tonight," Quinn said quickly, in an annoyed voice. He decided not to consume the blood. Right now, a day or 2 wouldn't be a problem, but if he continued down his path and something happened like before, where he was separated from the others, it would be disastrous. He didn't know how much time would shorten every time he consumed blood, but it was a risk he wasn't willing to take. With his head looking down to the floor, Quinn clenched his fist tightly. "Peter, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to save you this time. I'm not strong enough. Not yet." Seeing Quinn's actions had put a smile on Fex's face. Many vampires didn't heed this warning and continued to consume blood. Eventually, the Punishers needed to step in and deal with the problem. Thinking about that particular group of vampires, better known as Punishers, started to give Fex a tingling feeling. He had never seen a Punisher himself, but had heard the dreaded stories about them. Instead of consuming blood from his blood bank or relying on Layla for blood, Quinn decided to allow his HP to continue to decrease every hour, hoping to build up his resistance. It wasn't very pleasant for him, as he wished he had known about this sooner. Right now, he had 95 points of HP, which meant it would take 95 hours before his HP would reach nearly 0. When he was a lower level, building up a resistance wouldn't have been much of a problem. Over the next 2 days, Quinn no longer did his nighttime task. He still had hope, since the soldiers still hadn't done anything drastic to Peter. It didn't even seem like they were torturing him. This was all because Quinn could still feel connected with Peter, but he didn't seem to be in pain or distress. After hours of searching, Logan could find near to no information about the dungeons underneath the military bases. Not only at their military base, but even others. In truth, this scared Logan from trying to help Peter even more. He was the type of person who did everything with a plan in his head. Every action had a chance for an outcome. With no information, he felt like a blind man walking through a maze. He continued to search, hoping to crack something. However, they had run out of time. It was now time for the inter-military base tournament. Each class first appeared in their home rooms, making sure they had everything they needed. Inside Quinn's backpack was the flask that Fex gave him when they were on the expedition. He had tried to return it, but Fex refused. Inside the flask was Layla's blood with a single drop of blood from the oat blood type. Although he wasn't able to consume the blood that day, he had placed some of it in the flask. 40 of 95 HP. His HP continued to decrease, and once it was low enough, Quinn would be able to drink it and gain the stat point. The flask held 200 milliliters of blood, the same amount as his level 2 blood bank, giving him a total of 400 milliliters of blood to regenerate from. However, there was no need for it for the event since he wouldn't be taking part. It was always best to be careful, just in case. After all the students had finished packing their belongings, they followed their homeroom teacher outside in front of the school gates. All of the students were lined up in a single file with their homeroom teacher out at the front. On the right side of the front entrance, the first-year students stood, and in front of them was General Nathan. On the left side, in front of the gate, all of the second-year students stood, and in front of them was General Duke. On both of the general's side were the sergeants. Standing in the center of the two groups was General Mike, who would lead the students during this event. He had the ultimate say. Paul, the head general, would stay behind, just like the other head generals. They were to remain at the base with the other soldiers. If an attack was to occur for whatever reason, military personnel were needed. It was essential to leave somebody in charge, and someone strong enough to defend the base. "All right," Mike yelled in a loud, booming voice. Somehow his voice was loud enough to carry outside and be heard from the very last of the crowd. "Your teachers will now be calling out the following students who will be participating in the events. Please come up to the front once your name has been called. Everyone else, remember, you are to support these people. Cheer at the top of your lungs," Mike shouted, banging his chest. There was silence among the students. "I said cheer!" Mike yelled again, and the students responded, shouting back. First, all of the second-year students who were participating in events were called up. There were a lot of events to go through, since the event was similar to the old Olympics. There were even some that were banned from using the abilities. After all the students for the regular events were called up, the students for the 3 primary events were called up. A single student from each homeroom group would be selected for the main events. In front of them, 10 second-year students were to participate in the fighting tournament. Quinn was around the middle of his line. Still, his eyesight was great, and he was able to see that every single one of the students selected was level 8. The ability system only went up to level 8. There was a good chance some of the students who stood up there had abilities that went beyond their grades. Now that all the second-year students had finished being called out, it was time for the first-year students. 3 students from each class were selected for the 3 events and walked up to the front. Finally, it was time for Dell's class. He started by calling up the students for the crafting event and then moved on to the others. "For the ranged event, Layla Monroe." She walked slowly to the front, but was prepared. When walking past, she made sure to keep her head down, avoiding eye contact with those in her class. However, this didn't stop her from hearing the cruel remarks. "How much do you want to bet on her elimination in the first round?" a student said. "First round, I think she'll forfeit before it even starts." "It should be me up there." "I think I would do a better job, and I don't even use a ranged weapon." Just then, a voice came. "Layla, do your best." She looked up to see who had said those words. To her surprise, they came from Vorden. She smiled at him before hurrying it up to the front. "And finally, for the fighting tournament." Vorden, who was near the front of the line, had already started moving before hearing his name being called out, but after a few steps, he suddenly froze, hearing Dell's last words. "Student Peter Chuck, Everyone who belonged to Dell's class started to look at each other in confusion, while Quinn and his friends just stood there stunned. Due to Peter's shocking incidents, many knew who he was, especially after he was suspected of working with Pure. However, the other classes were unaware of why Dell's class was gossiping and making an uproar. "Is that the same Peter as before?" a student said. "I thought he was a member of Pure." "Maybe he wasn't, and they just found him?" The speculation surrounding Peter grew as to why he hadn't appeared. If he was there in front of them, it meant the military must have cleared him as innocent. Still, after the students stopped wondering why Peter was there, a bigger question popped into their minds. Why did he get selected as a replacement for Vorden in the fighting tournament? Peter was well known for being a level 1 weak Earth user for most of his school days. It was only later that he had improved and managed to get himself up to level 4. The students weren't the only ones questioning their motive, though. So were Quinn and the others. Out of thin air, a light circle started to light up at the front, next to where the other students stood. A few moments later, the light had dissipated, and in its place stood a soldier, and in front of him was Peter. When seeing Peter in front of their eyes, their hearts and minds started to settle slightly. Everyone there felt a little guilty for deciding not to rescue Peter. Seeing him up on the stage without a single scratch on his body allowed their minds to be at ease. "It looks like the connections were right after all," Quinn thought. "They haven't been hurting him in the dungeon, but why have him participate in the tournament? It makes no sense." However, Logan, who had been busy coming up with multiple outcomes, had thought about this possibility as well. It was just one of the lower-chanced ones. At this point, the military most likely already considered Peter as a member of Pure. Not only had the video been made confirming this detail, but the fact that he re-infiltrated using a transformation skill was like a double confirmation in their eyes. The only reason why they would want Peter to be in this fight was if they thought Pure was watching. If they cared about Peter that much to save him from the clutches of True Dream, then perhaps they would do the same again at the interbase tournament. The problem was, it wasn't Pure who had saved him last time. They didn't care about Peter at all. What this also meant was Peter wasn't out of the woods yet. The fighting tournament would be the stage to show all of the Pure members what they were doing to their colleagues. After all the participants were called out, the contenders were all shipped off together and headed out first. Following General Mike, Layla decided to stay close to Peter. She didn't know any of the others and wanted to learn more about what was in the dungeon. This was because part of her mission at the military base was to find out information about the dungeon. "Hey, Peter, are you all right?" Layla whispered. Before Peter could even answer, one of the soldiers escorting the group by their side got in between the two of them. "No one is permitted to talk to student Peter Chuck until after the event," the soldier said. Layla backed down, and the other students found it strange that Peter was receiving special attention, but they didn't think much of it. They were far too focused and excited about their upcoming events. The rest of the students followed the two generals, Nathan and Duke. They carried on walking and took a path around the main central plaza area. It was where most of the non-military personnel and soldiers who were on break would be resting and enjoying their time. Eventually, they were led to a place they hadn't seen in a long time. It was the training ground. It was a place mainly used for soldiers to practice battle with their mechs or test new equipment, but today it was empty. A massive orange wasteland with barely any signs of life, apart from a few large craters here and there, made from who knows what. Towards the side of the field were several large handlers. Usually these would be used to store such equipment. The students were then led over to the hangar. When inside, it was different from what they had imagined. It looked like the whole place was empty. There weren't any mechs, not a single storage box or anything. "They must have cleaned this place out recently," Logan said. "What made you say that?" Fex replied. Logan and Fex were part of the same class, but they didn't speak much to each other when Quinn wasn't around, perhaps due to their first meeting not being a pleasant one. Not everyone enjoyed being blasted to the other side of the room. Fex had only joined Quinn's team before due to Aaron, and then Peter left, and Logan was never in their class to begin with. Since this wasn't a portal outing, there were no such teams, and students had to stay with their classmates. "You see all that rubble? If it were like this from the beginning, the dust would have settled. There are also several markings and patches suggesting that things have been moved out of here recently," Logan explained. "Oh, well, not like it means much. I thought we were going to head over to Military Base 1. What the hell are we doing here?" Fex asked. "Attention!" Mike shouted, and the students stopped and saluted. The next few words he spoke were short and sweet. "Good night!" In an instant, he had placed a mask over his face, and at the same time the soldiers, including the sergeants and staff, all did the same. Gas instantly started filling the room. Some of the students began to panic, while a few remained calm. "Of course this would happen," Logan said. "They gassed us on our ride here, and now that we're moving to another base, don't you think they'll do the same?" Logan gently let out before his eyes closed and fell to the floor. The students around started to collapse one by one. "Your body is being affected by a strange substance. Resistance +1. Resistance +1. You are now immune to the substance." Quinn had received the same messages which appeared when he was traveling to the school by bus, only this time it had stated he now had immunity against it. Looking around, he could see all of the students nearly collapsed by now, with a few struggling to fight against it. One of those was Fex, but even he was eventually affected and fell on the floor. Unlike Quinn, it was his first time being subject to the gas. Not wanting to seem suspicious, Quinn too decided to sway his body slightly while letting his limbs go floppy and faking a fall to the ground. Once all the students had been put to sleep, the hangar doors were opened, allowing the gas to be let out. After the soldiers got to work, they placed a black bag over each of the students' heads. After what had happened with Peter, the military was taking extra precautions. There was a chance a student could be woken up or even have an ability that counteracted the smoke. While Quinn was being bagged, he tried his hardest to pretend to be asleep. It seemed to work, as after the bagging, the soldier went on to the next student. It was impossible to see, but he could still hear everything that was going on outside. The sound of something large and heavy was heard, followed by several men grunting. He could then hear the squeakiness of wheels. A big clunk was heard, and what followed after was a sort of humming sound, like an electric current passing through something. "I've heard this sound before, but where?" Quinn thought. He tried to pinpoint the sound, but his mind was working against him. It was nearly impossible to shift through his memories until he figured out where he had heard this sound before. "Start shifting the students in, through the portal one by one," a soldier said. The words were spoken from far away, and maybe others wouldn't be able to hear them, but Quinn could. He finally figured out why the sound was so recognizable, because it was the sound of a teleporter. "Wait, why do we need to go through a teleporter?" Quinn thought. "Wasn't the military bases on Earth?" After finding this information out, he felt like there were two possibilities. Either the bases weren't located on Earth, or the event itself was on a different planet altogether. Right now, Quinn would do anything to rip the black sack off his head, and the problem was he really could do it. He was 100% conscious of what was happening around him. The main reason for this was to see the color of the portal. If it were a white portal, it would indicate they were traveling somewhere on Earth. If it were a colored portal, he would know they were going to a different planet. Military Base 1 was different from the other military bases. It was where the current government would reside, hiding behind the most skilled personnel. It was also where the leaders would gather, and was the only base that didn't have a school campus. The place and locations of all military bases were kept secret to the students during their time at the academy. This was to stop information from being leaked outside. This included the smaller factions in the outside world that didn't quite agree with the military's doing. This is why Quinn thought it would make sense for the main military base to perhaps not be situated on Earth. However, he wasn't able to find out, or, at least, not today. Because before he could think of it anyway, his body was lifted and chucked into the portal to the destination on the other side. Over at one of the other military bases, a school was also getting prepared to send all their students to Military Base 1. Nate was at his desk, sitting down, staring blankly at the pieces of paper lying in front of him, while the other students were busy packing away their things and getting ready for the tournament. "You are still looking at that thing?" Sam said in shock as he came over and placed his bag on the desk and sat nearby Nate. "We are going to depart any second now, and you still haven't even packed your things. Get up already." I know," Nate replied, "but I think I might have found the person we were looking for." "You mean the blood evolver?" "I'm not saying he isn't in the tournament, but I do doubt your slow brain, which is good only at fighting, was able to figure out something like that. Go on then, tell me, how did you reach your conclusion?" Nate then lifted the sheet of paper that he had been staring at all this time. The paper showed a long list that contained all the names of students who would be taking part in the interbase tournament. Seeing the paper's contents, Sam's eyes widened in shock, and he quickly moved his hands to put the papers down on the desk, grabbed his bag, and placed it over the list of names. "Are you damn crazy?" Sam whispered. "How did you even get the list of names of all the participants?" "It seems like fate wanted me to find them, Sam. When I came into the classroom yesterday night, it was on the teacher's desk. Somebody must have misplaced it." Slapping his hand against his forehead, Sam was starting to wonder how Nate had ever made it this far in life. Although this side of him was why the two of them were good friends and got along in the first place. "That doesn't mean you can just take it for yourself." "Oh well, too late now. As long as we return it, it should be okay and may save us from all the trouble we are going to face," said Sam. "Anyway, after finding the list of names, I started to do some research. I contacted students from the other schools inquiring about each of the participants in the fighting tournament. The main thing I was looking for was a student that fought with gauntlets. After all, there aren't many students who chose to do battle with such a close-ranged weapon. Not only that, but based on the information we have, we know he is a first-year student. This narrows down our suspects even more. After asking around, it seems like there is only one student who fits the bill. He goes by the name of Larry Starr. This person is our blood evolver. He has to be. No, I'm sure of it. I can feel it in my gut." At the start of the explanation, Sam was on board and was starting to be impressed. Was this the same Nate he had grown up with? However, hearing those last words caused Sam to take a step back a bit. Whenever Nate had a gut feeling about something, it was always 100% wrong. He decided to shrug his shoulders and let Nate go on with his wild thoughts. It wasn't hurting anyone this time, so there was no harm done. "Okay, but what about the zombie? You are interested in him as well, right?" Sam asked. "About that one I have no idea. We might not even see him since the nature of his ability is only to heal. I agree that he was strong in combat, but on a tournament scale while not in the game. The fights might not work out the same way." Sam decided to move his bag off the list of names. He then decided to grab the pieces of paper and return them to the teacher's desk before she could enter the classroom. While placing it at the front, Sam couldn't help himself and take a peek at all the names on the list. These names would be of the people who would, in the future, control the world. What Sam also noticed was that each of the names was a little number in brackets. When looking at Nate's name, the number 6 could be seen. Judging by this, he could easily assume that all the numbers indicated all the students' ability levels participating in the fighting event. "You've always been the underdog in these types of situations, but I know you'll prove everyone wrong." Looking at the names, one could see that Nate was one of the lowest levels in the fighting tournament, especially when looking at all the second-year students. Nearly every student that was participating was either a level 7 or 8 in terms of ability level. Nate was the exception in this challenge. Using his high fighting skills, he would be able to overcome the difference in his strength of abilities. There was also a second reason why Nate could compete on an even level with the higher ability levels. It was because of his soul weapon. Although abilities could be the same, soul weapons were often not. Even if two students had the same earth ability level, their soul weapons would be completely different. One could come in the shape of a hammer, while the other may be a shield. Some soul weapons weren't even objects themselves, but were seen as an evolution of their abilities. With how different soul weapons were between each person, they would sometimes make a massive difference in power. In this case, Nate's soul weapon would increase his power to the point that it will allow him to fight them on an equal level. This was why Nate was respected by the higher-level students and looked up to by the low levels as well for overcoming that gap. Looking through the names, something had caught his eye. He was sure that Nate would be at the lowest level there, even out of the first years, but it seemed that wasn't the case at all. "What? They can't be serious! Am I seeing things correctly?" Sam brought his head closer to the sheet of paper to have a closer look, but he wasn't mistaken at all. "One of the first years, they have a level 1 on her. What were they thinking? Are they trying to get her killed? It has to be a typo, right?" When inspecting the names closer, Sam also noticed that there were lines between all the participants' names in the fighting tournament. He wasn't quite sure what this meant, but if he was to take a good guess, it would be who their opponents were in the first round. Across from the Level 1 name, Peter Chuck was another Year 1 student who went by the name of Larry Starr, a Level 6 user.
Well, what are the chances of that? I guess you might be able to go against our so-called Blood Evolver after all. It should be an easy win for him.
As Sam put the piece of paper down, he looked up and realized that all the students had suddenly gone silent and were staring in his direction. Finding the whole thing strange, he tried to turn away when a slender body came into his view. "Now, would you like to tell me what you were doing with that piece of paper?" Silver asked with a smile.
Hi, Quinn here. Wondering what happens next? If you want to jump the queue and unleash all episodes, click on the link here and install the Pocket FM app.